it's an invigorating place to work. We energize each other, and every year feels new because it in fact is. So we can make it however we can envision it. We have to agree. We have to have some consensus building. But at the very end of the day, to have that kind of direction with students, with families, it's everything. It changes everything.
You're listening to the Bold by Choice podcast with Vashaunta Harris and Jim Goenner, where we ask what school could be and learn from the people brave enough to build it. Powered by the National Charter Schools Institute.
And today, to help us frame our conversation, we are joined again by our colleague and co-host for the season, Don Cooper. Welcome back to the show, Don.
Hey, Vashaunta. Hey, Jim. It's great to be here with you.
Well, we've been having a good time this season so far, and I think we're all pretty pumped about today's episode. I am becoming a fast fan of Ted Coldry's book, Split Screen Strategy. And in chapter 6, it was focused on this idea that improvement is about reliability and that innovation is about discovery. Why do those two goals require different mindsets and structures?
Yeah, Vashaunta, and that's a theme that Ted really carries throughout the split screen strategy, is that when you have these different, I'll call it areas that you're working in, the different screens, you just need to approach the issues a little differently on things. And if we're about improvement, what we're looking for is things that we know. They're the knowns, okay? So we want to know that if a teacher goes through a certain type of training and it affects his or her behavior in a certain way, and that changes the action in the classroom and that gets a result, okay? So that's reliable. And then we look at how do we take those reliable systems that consistently produce a result and then scale it, okay? So that's taking something, making it a lot bigger, trying to help more kids that way. That's part of the democratic purpose of education, is to make these great systems available to everybody so that they can learn more stuff. The innovation sector is completely different because sometimes you just go into a setting where you don't necessarily have all the answers. You have some good ideas. You have a little bit of experience, you might have a little bit of theory behind it, and you want to put those good ideas into action and see if they're actually able to get results for kids. So when we're in the improvement sector and we're looking for reliability and we're looking for things that are predictable and that are scalable and that are going to improve results for kids in that area, the innovation sector is about discovery. It is about exploration. It is about trying new things. That has a little bit of risk associated with it because not everything that we try is necessarily going to work out the way that we think it's going to try. So we need to have some guardrails around that to eliminate failure as quickly as possible. But oh boy, does that also have a big upside too? Because if we're not willing to try new things, we're not willing to learn how to do stuff better. And when we learn how to do stuff better, we sure can accelerate progress.
That's absolutely right. And Ted talks a little bit about, in theory, if we allow space for innovation to occur, and then it does achieve those results, we got to do like what Harriet Ball says, right? Share everything. We're supposed to pass that along to the next group or grow it or scale it. But sometimes when that happens, when that innovative piece has been absorbed into a larger system, that's where we sometimes experience the struggle or the failure. Jim, I'd like to invite you into that conversation. Why is it that sometimes when something that's successful in its innovative state or its infancy sometimes begins to struggle when it's absorbed by the larger system?
Vashaunta, I just got to hit on this chapter by Ted, chapter 6, right? Get past the old institution of adolescence. I periodically pick up and read that and reread it. And here's why. It's a mind bender. And I'm going to try and explain why with a quick story. Two young fish are swimming along, and an older fish nods and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" The young fish swim on, and eventually one asks the other, "What the hell is water?" And the reason that I think so aptly gets to this is when you read this chapter and you think about adolescence and all of the trappings of it and how it short changes our youth. It's a mind bender. And in fact, I find it such a mind bender that there's hardly anybody you can talk to about it because it's such a shift of the paradigm.
Yeah, Jim, I think you're right in that it really is a shift of the paradigm and the way we think about it. And if you just think about the way that you and I grew up relative to how kids are growing up today, it's so different. And we've created a public education system that traps kids in these old notions of adolescence. You know, that high school is supposed to be preparatory for either college or career on things. We don't have flexibility. We're not allowing kids to reach their full potential earlier on stuff. We've really bottled up a lot of talent within the structures that we've created and continue to perpetuate.
And we want, and our kids want, to be trusted. They want real responsibility. They want to do real things. And basically, if you step back and take the cynic's view, we legally require them to go to school. If they don't show up and comply, we'll send the truant officer after them. They can't get real work because they've got to be in school. Like there's all these things that we do to quote protect them, but in some ways our protections actually are preventing them from growing and from struggling and from learning. It's ironic to me that there's books for adults called Fail Forward.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we try and protect our kids from failure, and yet that's one of the best learning ways there is.
Yeah. One of the things I just love about the emerging areas of the school choice movement around things like course choice and out of system learning is that high schoolers and other kids and families can design what the educational experience looks like for them. So it's no longer the 7:30 to 3:30 inside of a one building situation. It's bundling education together, sometimes online, sometimes in person, sometimes experiential, sometimes in homeschool situations, to do things that are right for that youth.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows them to achieve more. It allows them to develop at their own pace. It unleashes talent on things. Vashaunta, I'll just read you the last paragraph of Ted's chapter. I think it really kind of sums the entire thing up about why we are stuck in this old mindset of adolescence and why the institutions still exist. And what Ted says is trusting teens, treating them more like adults is an idea unlikely to be adopted quickly, but it is worth trying. People often do live up to what's expected of them. And right now, we're not expecting a lot out of our kids, and we can expect a lot more.
Well, you said it right, and you are absolutely on the money with our guests today. Friends, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to transition here really quickly. Today, we're exploring a question that sits at the heart of school design. And we ask ourselves, what if teaching was treated as a true profession, not just delivering instruction, but actually shaping up the school itself? And today, I'm really, really excited to be joined by two new fast friends. I am joined by Amy Junge from Education Evolving and Dr. Julie Cook from the Teacher Powered Schools Network. And together, they're part of a growing movement where teachers don't just work in schools, they help to shape them and to lead them. So today, we're going to walk through a little bit about what this model looks like, why this model exists, how the decisions are made, what it looks like inside a school, and what it changes for the teachers as professionals and for the students. Ladies, thank you both for joining us here today.
Thank you for having us.
Well, before we jump in, I do want to offer you both the opportunity to share a little bit about yourselves and who you are. So, Amy, I'll come to you first just to share with our listeners a little bit about who Amy is.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I am Amy Junge. I was an elementary and middle school teacher and then a middle school administrator. I live in California with my own kids and family, and I love the work I get to do across the country supporting schools using this innovative approach to teaching and learning.
Love that. Love that. And same with you, Dr. Cook.
Julie is fine. Hello, I'm Julie Cook. I am a teacher, a teacher leader at the Souderton Charter School Collaborative, just outside of Philadelphia, Montgomery County. And I've been there for almost the duration. I've been there for about 25 years. And that, I think, is key to our conversation. And I also work with Amy at the Teacher Powered Schools Network as a coach.
I'm so excited to dive in here. Listeners, you all know I get a little bit of a sneak peek with all of our guests. So you all are in for a treat. Amy, one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about at first is kind of the why around teacher powered schools. And our charter history is really, really rooted in the why and really why teacher powered schools are so powerful today. So if we think about it, what was the problem that the early thinkers were trying to solve in creating this new model, the teacher powered schools model?
So really, teacher powered schools go right to the heart of why chartering was created, which was to bring decision making closer to the educators that know students best. And we didn't create it. We studied it. We were really interested in what happens when teachers control their work and are they emulating high performing organizations. As we were thinking about why were these schools created? Why were teams using this type of leadership model? We know that the education system is not designed to meet the needs of today's students and educators. Achievement is lagging. Student-centered experiences are not the norm across our schools. Educators are dissatisfied and departing, and that was even before the pandemic. Really, the teaching profession lacks diversity, and there isn't a lot of students wanting to be teachers. That is not a profession that they're looking to go into. And in many schools, the family relationships were one way and transactional. And so ultimately, the school community is being untapped. And at teacher powered schools, it's really leaning into the assets within that community and empowering teachers and families to be able to be in decision-making spaces.
Absolutely. And when I think about, that part of our history, we're talking like the late 80s, early 90s. And we're talking about like where teachers were constrained. Amy, what do you think wasn't working for students at that time as well?
I think similar things in that teachers didn't have voice and agency and ownership over their work, and neither did students. Students were learning in very rigid learning environments where their interests were not guiding the learning. And so as schools were thinking about how can we create more engaging environments, they realized you have to change both the teaching experience and the student experience to overall improve schooling.
Absolutely. And, listeners, we've been studying a few of those early thought leaders, and we've been talking about our friend Ted Koldery in the past few episodes. And one of the things that I love in a couple of his books is he challenges us to challenge the givens, right? And as a former teacher who had been in a very traditional space, when I learned about okay, teachers are also the leaders of a building, I love the concept, but I'm like, wait, what does that mean? What does that look like? So Amy, I'd be interested in you sharing a little bit with us in terms of from the network perspective, what are some of the decisions that you've seen teachers really take on in your network?
Good question. So when we think about teacher decision-making, we're thinking about the collective team of teachers, not one teacher. And we're thinking about areas where they make decisions impacting student success. And so we think of it in terms of 15 potential areas teams could be making decisions in, which falls into three main buckets. So program, things like learning program, assessments, school level policies, professional development, personnel, hiring, not just of teachers, but hiring of leaders for the school, teacher evaluation, and then administrative decisions, lots of kinds of budget decisions, staff pattern, scheduling. I will say that it looks different at every school. Every teacher-powered school is unique. It's an approach, not necessarily a model, given that each team is really drawing from the assets within their community and building on the school that the students that they serve need. And that is often done through consensus at smaller schools, under 100 students, but we have several schools that are over 1,000 students. And so in those places, it looks more like distributed leadership, committee structures, those types of pieces.
That's awesome. And you have a number of schools in the network now, is that right?
We do. We have over 300 in 22 states and growing.
Oh my goodness. I would have never thought, right? Like that many schools that are really empowering teachers as professionals in this way. And Amy, as you look across your network, and especially those who are like highly involved, what happens to the traditional leadership roles in these models? And I imagine that it probably shapes out in different ways. Can you shed a little light for our listeners on that?
Absolutely. It does look different. There are some of our schools, almost all of our schools, about 95%, have an administrator on campus. Sometimes that position is shared between 2 or 3, co-administrators. But really what is the same across all of our schools is that the traditional hierarchy where decisions are made at the top and flow down, but accountability comes from the bottom and flows up, are shifted into a more circular organizational chart where educators are making decisions, holding themselves accountable, and have the ability to adjust and adapt to what their students need in real time, not just in their classrooms, but at the school level. The role of the principal definitely shifts. Instead of enforcing decisions made often above them and making the educators at the site do that, principals at a teacher-powered school hold everyone accountable for the vision and decisions that they have collectively made. They are also doing a lot of the administrative tasks that are required for any school to function around budget and codes and doing services for students and coordinating transportation and all the kind of pieces outside of the classroom. And there are procedures and processes and routines in place at teacher-powered schools to make sure that there are clear responsibility tracks. Everyone is accountable for that. Lots of transparency and communication.
Now, one thing I'm interested in is we talk about the principal or like administrator role that sits on a team of teachers that also have kind of decision-making power. Do principals teach during their day?
Many principals often teach during their day, but at a middle school or high school, it's often that they do one advisory or they might teach one period a day. At an elementary school, we have several elementary schools that have co-lead or co-principals or co-administrators. And so they are each, kind of co-teaching in different spaces, but they try to be in their classrooms. And that really keeps administrators grounded in the realities of what it means to be a classroom teacher in 2026. And I think that was especially important after COVID and really understanding the struggles and the challenges and the opportunities that come from teaching post-COVID.
Absolutely. And one of the things we talked about, especially as we look at Ted Coldry's split screen strategy, he almost holds up these two screens, one about innovation and one about improvement. And one of the thoughts were, hey, these charter schools, which at that time were kind of pilots in a way, hey, they'll go off and they'll run alongside our traditional districts and they'll create new things, new ways of doing and learning and teaching. And we're going to call that innovation, but we still have our district schools. And the aim there was that those schools would go through a cycle of improvement. And the early thought was that what worked at the charters, that those lessons would shift over to what some of us call traditional district schools and traditional districts themselves. And those learnings would be shared. Can you shed some light on how that actually shows up with the Teacher Powered Schools Network?
I think that teacher-powered schools really lives out Ted's theory around the split screen strategy, because we have about 40% of our schools are charters, but about 60% of our schools are district schools, many of them in states with collective bargaining, and so unions. And we have seen this, I think, especially be successful in Boston and Los Angeles, where they have pilot schools. And these pilot schools have protected flexibilities in areas like budget and hiring, schedule, learning program. And the teachers are really designing that learning, participating in decision-making spaces, all within a district union setting. New York City is another good example. Their union has actually led some of that work called the PROS opportunity, where schools can apply for those same flexibilities, where teachers are making decisions and leading collaboratively with their administrators, with their chapter or building reps, chapter chairs, and all to be able to do innovative things for students, to create student-centered learning environments, to give students more real-world learning opportunities, to ensure that positive identities are being met and they have strong relationships with the adults in the building. And so there are definitely places where districts are leaning into those innovations successfully.
And I'm just so glad you shared that with us. And this may be just like my limited perspective. We are often in conversation and it feels like a us versus them. Like it's either the districts or the charters. It's either the charters or the privates. And like one could say in the choice world, hey, there are plenty of options for students and families to choose from, and they get the power to choose the one that works for them. And I love that you all are a shining example of some district schools, some charter schools saying, hey, we're doing this work and we're trying to impact the entire nation around K-12 education. And there are some things we can do together. I find that personally very, very powerful. So thank you for sharing that with us.
I also find it powerful. Thank you.
I love it. I love it. Well, Julie, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. One of the things we've been thinking about is how do we share ideas, concepts, bringing in a network who's living it out. And then I love your angle today will be let's go and look inside of a school that is also living out this model. So before we jump into my first question, I'd love to give you time and an opportunity to share a little bit about who's, oh gosh, is it SCSC?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You got it.
I was about to jack up the acronym. Listeners, y'all know I do that all the time, so y'all stay with me. So share a little bit about who SCSE is, a little bit about your people who make up that building, and then we'll dive into my first question.
So, Souderton Charter School Collaborative, SCSC, was founded in 2000. So, we've been here for a really long time. We're, I think, the oldest brick and mortar charter school in Pennsylvania, and we're wildly successful. We are one example of a teacher-powered school, but there are many. So, I'll give you a little take on what ours looks like. So it was intentionally designed all these many years ago when charter law was first passed in Pennsylvania around kitchen tables and coffee tables and by my founder, Wendy Ormsby, who wanted a different experience for her own two children who had very different abilities and interests and strengths and all the rest. And so she thought, what if schools could look like they were seeking to adapt to the student and not the other way around? So that was her big idea in the late 90s. So our mission really focuses on individualized learning, experiential education, and family and community partnerships. And that shaped everything from the curriculum we were able to design to the classroom environment. And that idea was really set in motion and continues to be sustained by collaborative leadership. And that's really what she also saw. She came from the business world. And as soon as she got a peek into education, she thought about how isolating an experience it was for teachers. And how could it look a little bit more like people working in teams, which is the business world where she came from. So she set about trying to create a flatter organization free of the hierarchical barriers she saw in education. And as Wendy said, she was after a different sort of school for her own kids, and she understood that that would necessitate a different kind of school for teachers.
I love that. So as we think about this particular school, what does a teacher's role look like in this model in kind of like a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Sure. Well, first of all, we co-teach. And that's not a new idea, but there are more than one teacher in every classroom. We call them home bases. So again, we're working to prevent that siloed teaching experience. And so the practice advances, we are held accountable. We're meeting really all day long. And then students also benefit from the multiple relationships and the expertise of the teachers. And I have to say, we tend to stay. So we tend to stay. It's a sustainable kind of way to work in concert with other people. So teachers in any given day engage in all things teaching. There's direct instruction, there's small group work, there's one-on-one coaching. We also have field work quite a bit in our school since we are an experiential education school. We're planning PBLs, we're out and about in our community. A large part of our time is reviewing individual goals, setting new ones, reviewing progress. So there's a strong emphasis on really designing and refining our units of study that change every year because we have new students every year. So that's been super fun. So balance is the key to life, and it's not been easy, and it's not for everyone, but it's definitely been for me, obviously. So teachers in our school just aren't responsible for only teaching or work inside their classrooms with the students. They also help to advance the school. This might look like leading a program initiative. We peer coach, help evolve our curriculum, assessment practices. This meeting time is built into the schedule, super important. And so teachers can do the co-planning, reflecting, problem solving together. We do have whole school committees that are set up in smaller groups, and we have a whole school decision-making body that comes together and meets to make decisions about the whole school, which isn't easy either and needs a lot of capacity building. a lot of capacity building. But we're in different teams. So it might be student support teams, compliance with the state or our charter, our authorizer, culture, community partnership endeavors, you name it. We're constantly working to identify what needs doing and then setting about, whose strengths would best fit here, that kind of thing. And we do have formal work that advances the school, much of which looks like what a principal might do. We do have principals in my school. We have 2 co-directors. One is primarily responsible for like organizational structures and processes that advance the work, that the bird's eye view of the place. And the other is a director of education. And both of them do teach for an hour of their day. Yes.
I love that. When you all are thinking about how you pair teachers together, I don't know if there's like 2 or 3. What are some of the ways in which you do that? A lot of folks, I was at a PBL school, I was science, and I was often paired with a math teacher. There are other schools that will pair a general educator or content educator with a special educator. How do you all think about the teachers and how they pair up for their collaborations?
Well, it would depend on the home base. Teachers do sit on hiring committees. That being said, that doesn't happen too often because, again, we tend to stay. So we're an old team. We're getting better every year, and it's not true that people haven't joined us. It's that there's been some staples that have kind of seen us through, but. We might have a special education teacher on a team. We might have we have pods, we have multi-age groupings, and that's why we call them home bases, because students are really moving through fluid groups throughout the day in like a 1-2, or I teach in a 7-8. So in 7-8, it looks a little different because we have some content specialties. That being said, I'm in the room when science is happening. It's not my certification, but I can support. And I'm pretty quick on the uptake, and so is the math teacher. Sometimes in my ELA classroom, we're really trying to. We know our program and we know our students, and we work every day to co-teach, which makes everything easier. Everything. If you're wondering how do we have inclusion, that is how. It has to be supported with the adults in the place.
I can imagine it's a real sense of osmosis, right? Like learning that other content that maybe you don't lead necessarily, but you're in the room, you're in the space, you're helping students grapple with those concepts. I imagine that'd be pretty rewarding. I'm thinking about a couple of things. like governance, data review, right? We all have like these rich cultures around student data, and even how you may interact with your boards, your governing boards. How does that really work on teaching teams at teacher powered schools or SCSC?
Well, at my school anyway, so we have collective autonomy. We say, over, our curriculum, we do sit on hiring committees. We have home-based budgets. We set team personal goals, and we do report to our administrators, each other, and they do report to us. We set aside time in team meetings, so grade level bands like 1, 2s, and 3, 4s, and whole school to review data, reflect, adjust, and then advance in some way. So in this model, it is true that we do report to our board. We do report to our authorizer, and we're public schools, so we're responsible to the state as well. But I think all teachers in all schools everywhere are accountable, but in my school, very little happens to me. It doesn't feel that way anyway. When
That's
things do happen to us, we start thinking like, wait a minute, because it's a rare experience, but we decide together. So it's fun, it's messy, it's challenging. It is all on us. However, we are accountable for implementing our own plans, not implementing other people's plans, and being accountable for that work. So that little shift has meant everything to my career and helped me be able to have a multifaceted approach to teaching, which I think has made us successful. Wildly, as I said.
It's almost like you probably don't have to create a whole lot of buy-in because everyone is a part of making that decision. And I can only imagine just how powerful that is on the adult culture.
Exactly. It's an invigorating place to work. We energize each other, and every year feels new because it in fact is. So we can make it however we can envision it. We have to agree. We have to have some consensus building, which is sticky and messy and all the rest. But at the very end of the day, to have that kind of direction coming from the entire community, with students, with families, it's everything. It changes everything.
Absolutely. A friend of mine, we actually did NACSA Leaders together years ago. So shout out to NACSA and the leadership program. And we were talking about hiring, and she shared with the group, she said, every time you add a new team member, every time you lose a team member, it is a new team. And I love, I'm hearing that from her some years ago and hearing from you all approach that with your students. Every year you have a new group of students and you have to really think about your culture in that way. That's really resonating with me. Now, the question we get a lot on the podcast, we talk about to a lot of schools and a lot of school leaders, and folks are like, what's the impact? You talk about all these models, what's the impact? So I want to think about that on both the network level and then at the school level in this particular example. So Amy, I'll come back to you to start. As you look across the network, what's the impact that you are seeing on teachers?
Great question. We really think about it as students and teachers thriving together at teacher-powered schools. So one important impact on teachers is fewer teachers leave teacher-powered schools than traditional schools. So they are staying at teacher-powered schools. The departure rate is about 50% less of departures at teacher-powered schools. And also, our schools do not have the same link as student poverty rates where teachers at schools experiencing high poverty, teachers tend to leave more often and quicker. And we do not see that at our schools in teacher turnover. Teachers also collectively have higher net promoter scores, so they are recommending being a teacher more often than in traditional schools, and higher collective efficacy ratings around that.
That's important. That's powerful. I can only imagine what growth looks like for teachers in this space. It seems so organic. So I imagine there's a lot of growth built in there as well. And Julie, with you and thinking about your school, SCSC as an example, what do you see for students as a result of this model? How do students really benefit from having spent time with you all?
Well, first of all, our students are watching us. So if we're trying to prepare them to participate in, you know, democracy, then I think probably their school should mirror more of what the world looks like. So that's the case for sure. It's also the case that families and students are also brought into this shared leadership model, right? So some part of their day, some part of their schooling experience should definitely be theirs. And student-driven learning is definitely something that we're striving to include. And that's why it changes every year, because the students change, right? So we have whole year projects that are tied to student interests, tied to, interviews with communities and businesses in our town. We have PBL driven by student questions, and we have shorter investigations throughout the school day that are really, helped along by the adults and the experts that we find in our community and the families. But definitely the students are in it to win it. So what that means is they have buy-in. So buy-in equals learning. That's it. That is not a tricky concept. What is tricky is, trying to make sure that the status quo is held at bay, and we can hold space for, kids to be kids and to wonder and, keep the fun in school. So yeah, I think that's what's different. And I think if you put it, like we had the opportunity all those years ago, and I wish this on every teacher, if you just put a bunch of teachers in a room and said, well, reinvent school, which is what I had an opportunity to do, which is super fun. But they would come up with some common themes. And some of the themes we're talking about today, right? Relationships, individualization, learning embedded in the community, based on experiences in the real world, valuing families and things like that. So I think there are some common themes that teachers would come up with all on their own if invited to the table. So.
And I love how you're being really humble, but you all are quite high performing as well, I do believe. Correct?
Yes, I think I've said wildly successful.
Yeah. So let's let the public know. What's the numbers behind that?
The numbers. Well, I know we are, judged by the tests. We do very, very well. We're in the top couple. In my eighth grade, students perform in the top couple in the state every year. So in ELA, math, I think we're number 4, 5, 6. So we're always in the top 10 in the entire state of Pennsylvania. So we do have the tests going on, but our other metrics, including family involvement, family satisfaction, student satisfaction, our culture surveys. That's really, more of the focus. The test takes care of itself. As I said, if the kids show up and want to learn, check that box. The test follows.
Mission accomplished.
It doesn't lead it, right?
I love that. I love that. We want to kind of just wrap here with what makes this different? What makes this a movement worth spreading, right? 300 to 400 schools across the nation, maybe more. And so, Amy, from your perspective, what makes teacher-powered schools fundamentally different from maybe some other models that we've seen?
Great question. I think that what makes teacher-powered schools fundamentally different is it's an assets-based approach to schooling. And we are trusting teachers as the experts with experience in partnership with families and students to make the best decisions in education for the school and the community that they serve. And I think that true shared ownership comes through co-design and collaborative decision-making. And that is what you don't need buy-in when people have actually participated in the co-design.
Yeah.
And co-ownership is much more powerful than buy-in. Buy-in is kind of like the lowest level of getting people to agree to do something, right? But teacher-powered schools offers a different way, and it offers a way to have a professional path that is not an administrative path. We don't always have to take our best teachers and move them out of the classroom, but there's true leadership opportunities from the classroom where it really leads to the professionalization of the teaching job.
I love that statement. You're calling me to the carpet right now, right? When we think about as leaders, right? Are we trying to build buy-in or are we co-designing with our students, with our leaders? I love that. We're gonna keep that going. Um, what do you both think? I'll come to both of you on this last one. What are the conditions that need to exist? So if I'm thinking for board members or districts, authorizers who may be dreaming up their next thing, what are the conditions that need to exist for this model to take hold and to scale? Amy, I'll start with you, and then Julie, I'll come to you.
So I think at a state policy level, it is very helpful to have policy that encourages collective teacher-led design and innovation. Sometimes we see that through innovation zones, or chartering is one option as well. But policy that allows both for teachers working in charters, but also teachers working in the district. And so there's that real incentive to try something different because we know that the traditional system really is not working. For districts and authorizers, I think ensuring policy that ensures that the collective mindsets and leadership styles actually gets protected in meaningful ways so that an innovative leader, when they leave, that leadership transition does not suddenly erode all the collaborative shared leadership spaces that have been created. And so that there's some protected flexibilities along that.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece is that our systems for attendance, for rostering, for how we count time in school are all based on these traditional models. And so system changes that really allow for the innovations not to be able to just like work around the traditional system and circumvent that, but really be able to be a tool within the system are very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Julie, from a teacher who is also a leader, if there are other teachers out there who are listening, there are other leaders out there who are listening, what are the conditions that need to exist in the school for this model to take hold and to scale?
Yeah, I think, a culture shift it would be first up because, I always say I don't want a seat at the table. I want to set the table.
Love
So
it.
I think, that mindset, like people always say, oh, let's have, two teacher representatives from the school come to the district or something. And it's not meaningful and teachers kind of are on to them, right? Because some of the decisions that are made at the school level kind of get quashed by, again, those layers and layers of bureaucracy. The other thing that I would say is capacity building, as I've mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
You might be wondering, well, of course, teachers can't work on, budgetary issues. Well, they haven't been given, the space to learn about, other avenues of our profession and school leadership. And the goal, I would say, is to have a multifaceted career that keeps teachers, engaged in the work and in front of the students, rather than it's a whole different skill set. But the more leaders make more leaders, that should be their goal, so that people stay, so that work is distributed, because leaders aren't staying either in traditional
That's true.
models. They aren't.
That's true.
So I think both of those things are true from a teacher perspective.
Mm-hmm. There are a few things that are really just standing out to me as we've kind of navigated this conversation and as I reflected on our meeting yesterday too. And there are so many things to think about when you challenge the givens, right? As Ted would have us do. And it's a shift in role, but it's a shift in mindset. And I keep going back to this. It is like letting our brains say, you know what, whatever we learned before is cool. But what happens if we, in my case, right, like take a walk outside, get in the woods, and just really allow our brains to expand? What is the mindset that we walk around with? How are we thinking about what student achievement looks like? How do students learn? How do they like to learn? I think about my own work, right? I cannot stand to sit anywhere for about 90 minutes, no matter what I'm doing, right? And so sometimes that's true for kids too. And it's that mindset. How are we reflective and responsive? I love that you kept saying, right, well, it's a new year, it's new kids. And so we've got to make those shifts and being responsible to who your people are, your humans that are taking up space in your building. And I love that teachers get an opportunity to not just be responsible for their data, to not just be responsible for their unit plans and their lesson plans. They get to be responsible for major decisions that shape the life of the school. And that's a powerful reflection that I'm having as I'm like comparing like the reading, right? And then hearing you all share this living and breathing example. And I can't help but mention again, the learning from your innovative model being really shared and being really infused with folks who are at traditional districts. One of my favorite YouTube videos from our oral history was of Harriet Ball. And she's the teacher, one of the teachers that led to the KIPP movement. And one of the things she shared with the founders of KIPP was share everything, right? And if we take that with us, I look at you all as an example of that. You're sharing what's necessary. You're sharing everything with folks in your network and folks in district spaces too. And so those are just a few of the reflections as I'm listening and learning myself, sitting at your feet. Ladies, thank you so much for the gift of your stories and your time. This was absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Amy, if I'm a teacher out there and I'm listening to this podcast or a leader and I want to get connected, what should I do? Where should I go to spend more time with you all in the network?
Well, best place to start is at our website, teacherpowered.org. And from there, you can join our network. You can learn more about if there's schools near you, and there's ways to reach out to both Julie and I. And we are happy to talk and connect and look forward to learning about your school and what are priorities for your team.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you to our guests. Thank you to our listeners for joining us for today's episode of Bold by Choice. Again, this season is about exploring what's possible when schools design differently, when we take on that innovation role. Today's a powerful reminder of what we can achieve when we trust all of our humans, our teachers and our students, as professionals to run their buildings and to open themselves up to new possibilities. Well, folks, we will be back here, same bad time, same bad station next week. And we'll be exploring yet another TED Collaborative concept and a living, breathing example. I'll see you next time and stay bold.